So, hi guys, I want to welcome you back to Ponderings with Palm Coast. Today, I have a special guest that's come in, wants to share some time and views with you, and just kind of let us know today and in the future what our future could look like. So, today, Josh Weil, thank you for coming and spending some time with us. It is so appreciated.
Pleasure to be here.
Full disclosure, I'm a huge supporter.
Thank you.
And a bigger picture, Democrats in Florida are a growing group, and we're excited, and the opportunities present itself every day. I'm kind of loving that. So could you share with us a little bit what a lot of people I'm running into here locally, they don't really understand how a federal seat in Washington represents the 6th district. Could you help us understand a little bit of that?
Absolutely. I think most people's impression of that connection is usually in the negative way when they think of all of the earmarking and the contracts that people try to bring home, and the understanding that one of the components to a bloated federal budget or an expanded federal budget is oftentimes having 435 representatives all trying to make sure that there's something for them. But I mean, that is key because you have 435 representatives that are responsible to ensuring that their communities are taken care of and have what they need. And each of these communities is different. Maybe nowhere as great as in Florida. Florida is an incredibly diverse state, and it was something I got a great appreciation for in my first campaign when I, ran statewide back in the 2022 cycle. That traveling around the state, like you go into the Panhandle, and there's nowhere like Destin, and there's nowhere like Jacksonville, and there's nowhere that's like Orlando, and there's nowhere that's like Tampa, and there most assuredly is nowhere that's like Miami. And I haven't even named any of the parts of this district yet.
And we're switched, right? The South is the North and the North is the South. The old adage of Florida is made up by the entire United States. So
even in Collier County, where you have the wealthiest areas in the state in Naples, and then you have one of the poorest areas of the state in Immokalee that are served and managed by the same county commission and local representatives, and just widely disparate even in that region.
Right.
It's a very diverse state, and you have different needs. There are parts of this state that really depend on having a representative that understands agriculture. There are parts of this state that require your representative to understand and have a stronger working commitment to the VA services. There are parts of this state that have for defense contractors. I mean, Lockheed Martin's located in Orlando. I mean, we have Pensacola. We have the Space Coast. We have major federal programs that play a huge role in different areas, different parts of the government in different areas of our state. And the local community needs their representative to ensure that they are properly funded and adequately have proper oversight and regulation.
But we're also seeing, and I think from a civic standpoint, we're seeing more on the aspects of our government systems now than we've ever seen. And it's getting, I was at a city council meeting yesterday, and I told the mayor, oh my God, we need to have the high school students at the civic level sitting in this room watching this effort of our city council. But we're also seeing at the House side and the House of Representatives side presently that the numbers, Republican, Democrats, are so tight, so close that the parties themselves seem to be focused on certain objectives. So the District 6 needs and views become possibly secondary to the overall health and survivability of where we're headed with the government. And my concern is, and the need to get more Democratic representation in the House is to equal the three legs to this stool that we have, which is broken right now.
So there's a lot of things you said there. I'll try to work backwards from the end. The three-legged stool is completely broken right now, and the attacks on government efficiency are a big part of it. Government is not a business, right? In a business, you want efficient, streamlined operations, and the way that you do that is by centralizing and consolidating power. Right? So you take away, you remove redundancies, right? You streamline, you centralize, and you say, this person is going to oversee these related aspects, and we don't need two people that are decision makers on this when we can have one. But that's not how our government was designed. Our government was designed to be checks and balances, which means redundancies in power, which means spreading things out. It's designed to ensure that, the executive branch doesn't have full say over these things because they rely on the legislative branch to vote in the national best interest with representatives from every state. They rely on legislation for them to execute, hence the names. They're supposed to operate within the parameters of the legislative branch. And when there are differences in opinion, those differences get interpreted by the judicial branch, three stools on it. When we have a packed Supreme Court that is aligning with the executive branches in ways that defy or contradict both current legislation, which they are supposed to be interpreting, and the Constitution, which they are supposed to be interpreting and protecting, it's a complete removal of the purpose and security that we receive from that third leg branch. Now we're on a two-legged stool. And when we have a president who is issuing executive orders that, again, bypass congressional approval on areas where they're supposed to be, when they are trying to eliminate inefficiencies, you're talking about these things were approved, all spending goes through Congress. So this is spending that was approved by vote of 435 people by majority and then another 100 people by majority. And to have one or two people making decisions that they are changing that spending or eliminating that spending that has been approved by the largest body of our federal government eliminates the effectiveness or the strength of that stool. And now we've got a one-legged stool.
Well, and we're experiencing that here in Palm
Yes.
Coast today. We have the desperate need for infrastructure funding for a project, our water, which I'm sure you spent some time around here, people are going to be asking you about it. Hundreds of millions of dollars, well beyond what this small city is prepared to deal with. And that money's been frozen.
And our
Josh.
previous representative, Mike Waltz, was working hand in hand with and ironically, because he's now a member of the Trump cabinet that is freezing the spending on it, but he worked over the last few years with local government in Flagler County as well as in Volusia County to have the Army Corps of Engineers and the groups to help increase the resiliency for those coastlines.
Oh, he's happily taking credit for all. He stood in Flagler Beach at our pier and took the praise of all the representatives about the sand push, $15 million, which was paid for by the infrastructure.
Which was by Build Back Better, which he voted against. But I'll be honest with you, we met with the mayor of Daytona Beach Shores last week, and she's jealous of how much he did for Flagler County compared to what they've gotten so far, because
But she doesn't know what really
they wish
happened,
they
right?
had the same district. They wish they had as much as you did in it. And, they came to me because their concern is, getting scaled up and, getting the same level of Army Corps engineer support and infrastructural support that Flagler was receiving. Flagler is frozen now and concerned about it. Volusia's still trying to get up to where Flagler's at. And both of them are pressing needs that need to be attended and require, look.
And these are all conservative by nature representatives.
And we have a lot of
there.
great representatives. We have great representatives in Florida. We have, Max Frost in Orlando. But he has his own constituents and their own needs and issues, and he can't be working on the coastlines in District 6. When we have, whether you're going up and down the state or going across the country, there are members of the Environmental Caucus who would be more concerned about this, but these are not their constituents, and it's not, they have to make sure that their home base is taken care of first. So yeah, District 6 relies on having that representative there to support bills, to ensure that as bills are passed, the specific funding is earmarked for areas, the same way that, he was able to make sure that it was coming to Flagler, but did not ensure that Volusia was receiving the same amount. But both areas rely on it the same. And I think people are currently, and this is across the nation, not just in District 6, but I think people are currently starting to see some of the aspects of government that have been taken for granted. And, I think the analogy that I like is that, if you've never cooked, if you don't do any of the cooking in your house, and then you get sent to the grocery store one day to do the shopping, right? You might be walking through like, damn, olive oil is expensive. Like, what the hell do we need olive oil for? I never eat olive oil. Like, or, looking at some of these things, like, well, like, garlic's $5 now. Like, what, do we use garlic that often? But you were never doing the cooking, and so you don't realize the components or the parts of it that have been necessary all along, until you sit down to eat a meal and there was no olive oil or garlic used to cook it, and it suddenly tastes completely different. And people are starting to see that. They like the idea of the $2.5 trillion tax cut, until someone reminds them that it is impossible to have a $2.5 trillion tax cut without taking cuts from Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security, or some combination of the three. And in a district here where 24.9% of our population is 65 and above, where we have over 250,000 people that rely on those programs, that's a big loss if you take that away, something that people have been relying on.
But at the same time, they're asking for a debt ceiling raise of $4.5 trillion, which is, I think, underestimated for the need to fund tax cuts and other things.
Well, they understand because the debt comes after the tax cuts. When you do the tax cuts, what you're doing is you're reducing the amount of money coming in. And when you reduce the amount of money coming in, right, then you're going to wind up having overspent just based on the sheer volume of contracts that are already out there requiring to be paid. They're not all being written this year. There are corporations and companies, and this isn't even to say large scale. There are, locally owned farms all across the country that have government contracts that have all been frozen, by the way, from USAID and some of these other cuts recently. But small businesses, there are people, business owners, constituents, and corporations that have these contracts that are 5, 8, 10 years long, and they're in the middle of receiving them, and those are due to be paid out. And when you cut the amount of revenue we're bringing in, then there's going to be more debt on the back end.
I have yet to experience or talk to a family, including myself, that didn't experience some loss. Partner losing their job, get laid off, you lose income, and you increase your expense. Who in their right mind and living in a house would buy a bigger house after you've lost half your income? But that's a system that's been going on for a long time. and our taxes and the bigger picture. But you bring up a great point of in our community, you have a retirement community, people that are relying on the promises and commitments of our federal government to live out their years, and they're expecting some level of health care,
And
some level of
And to point out as well, these are not subsistencies.
No.
These are programs that you have paid into your entire life to receive in your later years.
Right.
So these are programs that you have personally funded. You paid into it when it was your time to put in. So that way there was something there when it's your time to take out.
And
And
that's
that
where
is
your
now
voice-
being taken from you. And with
Right.
with memes from Elon Musk calling the people complaining about it the parasite class leeching off the government, as if the government is funded by anything other than taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, we're not a business. We're actually a government that's supposed to take in money and then diversify it to help the citizens. Of this
We are the
country.
ones who pay for these programs.
Exactly.
And since 1980, when the corporate tax rates went from being in the high 70s and low 80% to
Right.
being in the high 20s and low 30%, we are the ones paying for the lion's share of these things.
Right, and I've got some graphs that prove just that and shows as the corporate rate dropped, our debt went up. And you know what else went up? The number of millionaires and
Yep.
billionaires in our society.
It turns out, I mean, we're still waiting. It's been 45 years now, and maybe one day it will start to trickle down. But what we've seen is that when you take the taxes off of capital gains for corporations and you make it easier for them to pull money out of the economy for themselves, that is what they do. When you tax corporations at a higher rate, right, the goal is not to, if this is just basic business, if something is being taxed at a higher rate, you are not going to try to generate or produce more of the thing taxed at the highest rate. You are going to move the money around into other areas that are taxed at a lower
Exactly.
rate. And so when you tax the money that they pull out, that they can award themselves on executive salaries and compensations and bonuses and stock payouts and for the large shareholders, then they will take it out and it doesn't go down into the system. When you tax those, it stays in the system. It doesn't get pulled out. The larger the penalty, it's not that, well, they're going to get crushed taking all this money out. They stop taking the money out. So then where does it go? Then it goes into facility improvements. Then it goes into hiring on additional staff and employment. Then it goes into expanding their projects into new locations and markets. Then it goes into increasing worker salaries and benefit compensations to be more competitive and get more skilled workers from your competition. It goes into all of these other areas that actually do, for lack of better words, trickle down and benefit the working class, that benefit the working,
Sure.
the workforce in this country.
Warren Buffett did a phenomenal three-part series. We were talking about just that and how the reason that the taxes were so high was to motivate the corporate sectors to reinvest the money, because it wasn't taxable, just what you were describing, into better facilities, safer facilities, better pay for its employees, and expansion and growth. And yet all that went away. I worked for the Boeing company for 10 years, and during COVID, they got billions in PPP money. And you know what they did with it? They bought their stock back, which didn't benefit anybody but them. But these scenarios are really what you are going to be faced with at the federal level when this concept, and we can only hope and be motivated that your win will send a huge message, and the other three challenges that are going on, which will flip the House, and the House would then have Hakeem Jeffries as the speaker, and at least there would be an effort and a possibility to change who the chairs are in these subcommittees,
Yes.
and switch things around and get us more in line. And I run into a lot of people while I'm supporting you knocking on doors, and they are scared. They are angry. They are getting snippets of the news like the rest of us, and they are saying, I want to do something. And there's some that are very angry. And my response to them is vote for Josh, because he will be the first shot, not literally, but visibly, to show that we, the people in this society, want to get back to a more balanced effort.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's a simple concept of unbought power. So, this is a race where we have not accepted and will not accept contributions from corporate donors or lobbyists. And as a result, our campaign is completely funded by the people. And so it is the people that we work for. You work for who pays you. And if you are paid by special interest groups or corporate PACs, then that's who you work for. Along the other lines, and you and I were talking about Congressman Frost Town Hall yesterday before this began. He raised a great point about not thinking of us as the minority party, but the opposition party. And the opposition party's point isn't to try and fight back or stop everything that the majority party does. It's to provide an opposing view for the future, for surviving the situations that we're in, for improving the state of our nation moving forward, which is something that the Democratic Party needs to be focusing on more. And I think a lot of people aren't congressional news junkies like you and I might be, where you go on and you look at who's sitting in the caucuses and committees across the House. But
oh, you mean the high school drama that goes on in all these subcommittees screaming at each other?
But if you follow these things, it is very different than usual. And the reason is because of the narrow majority in the House. So traditionally, these committees are set up so that way you have roughly equal representation among both parties on all of your committees and subcommittees. And with the, a 1-seat advantage being to the chair, which comes from the majority party, the party that has control of the House and the party of the Speaker. Because the House is so narrow at this point, and it's so difficult for them to pass legislation right now, when you go on and you look at the committee membership makeups, there's a difference of 6, 8, 10 seats on a lot of these in terms of spots that they gave to Republicans and Democrats. And so there's a huge advantage from the Republican Party in these committees, which greatly influences or affects what comes out of them, which is a bit of a problem.
But nothing's coming out of them. That's the biggest
part
problem.
Of why
no values.
Part of why nothing's coming out of them as well. Now they have the numbers to bring things out of them, but you also have to have perfect attendance and unanimity on the issues, and you also have the concerns of your constituents. But no, we're in the faux outrage portion of this right now, where you're starting to see a number of Republican congressmen from across the country coming out and saying, well, yes, I supported this, but I had no idea it would impact, our district.
Here in Florida.
I had no idea that, there was a representative from Kansas. It was like an entirely agricultural area, just pure farmland. He's like, well, I had no idea that they were going to cut the funding to our farms.
Or our workers. We want exemption. What did this?
They're not willing to vote against it yet, but they're absolutely willing to start, at least pretending to be outraged or surprised or kind of leaving clues that, like, they might.
Right.
And so, if these things went, if Congress decided to go and push an expanded farm bill next week, to make sure that, this money was going and unfrozen and available, would they vote for something that would counteract what, President Trump and Elon Musk have just done very specifically in recent weeks? That's yet to be seen. I think that we will be getting there down the line, because the longer these things go on and the more people hurt, the more some of them will be pushed to action. And when you have 216 of them right now, because I'm not counting Victoria Spratz, who decaucused and moved away from the Republican Party at the start. The number you'll see is 216 or 217 for the Republican count, based on whether they're counting Representative Spratz or not. But, when you have 216 of them, to get all of them to stay completely on board, regardless of the harm that's coming in their district and their constituents and the blowback that they're getting from red districts, because they're Republican congressmen.
Well, you're hearing that here in your
only
campaign.
need one or two of them to break.
Right.
You only need one or two of them to be like, I won my election by 1.5 points, and they're calling for my head right now. And so we can see some things happening in the near future. It might take a couple weeks for, unfortunately, the pain back home to become strong enough that the outcry and the threat to re-election for the congressman becomes palpable enough for them to take action. It's not going to be as immediate, but I do think that we are on that track.
Right.
We are headed there.
I thought I'd take a moment, kind of shift a little bit. There, you have an immense team of people that are knocking on doors, and they're really supportive. The energy is there. What do you say to those volunteers and those caucus people to represent you in talking to those Democrats and those MPs? And I ran into some Republicans, and like you, I love sitting across from a Republican. I have the best time. It makes me so happy to see that.
If they don't slam the door in your face, those are some of the best conversations we have.
They are. But what would you say to them? What would you like them to share about you, or what you're looking for, or why they need to step up and get there April 1st?
So I mean, there's a lot of things that need to be messaged, and we can't be sending people to doors with a list of like 27 things to discuss. It needs to be, you need to narrow it down to, 3 to 5 at max. And unfortunately, there is a large percentage of this district that is still not even aware of the special election coming up. And we're doing all sorts of things to try to make sure they know. We've got, what do we have up right now? We have over 1,000 signs up across the district, with another, and all of these signs are either 4 foot by 4 foot or 4 foot by 8 foot. So 16 and 32 square foot signs.
Like this one.
Like this one. So this big or half of this. Right? And so we have these signs absolutely everywhere. And we just got another 800 in that I think 200 have gone out. And so 600 more to kind of be placed across the district. In addition to, the thousands of yard signs that people are requesting and that are going out. So we're trying to make sure that it's everywhere they look. But one or two of the things needs to be, like we have to start off every conversation with, did you know there was a special election? And if they say yes, it's a completely different track of conversation than if they say no. And they say no a lot. And so, there's a lot of information that needs to be provided there. Like, are you familiar? Your U.S. Congressman was Mike Waltz. He has been appointed to Trump's cabinet. There is a vacancy. You currently have no representation in Congress. There is election on April 1st. We've already had the primary. If you didn't know, your probably didn't. You didn't know there was one on April 1st.
The numbers were
pretty safe bet you didn't vote on January 28th. 14% of voters across the district did, which means 86% of them did not.
Right.
Then so we have a Democratic nominee and we have a Republican nominee. And if we're talking to Republican or independent voters, then they don't know that there's a race, then they probably need information on both. If you want to talk about values, I think that the causes that we have individually dedicated our lives to prior to running for public office say everything.
I agree. I'm looking forward to the day when President Trump says he doesn't know who Randy Fine is because you win this race. And that will be the consistency of our presidency when Randy's going in everything I see. I've been supported by Donald Trump, and when he loses, Donald Trump will say he never even met the guy, didn't know anything about him.
He is tying himself. His one message out to voters is Trump likes me. We were at a Volusia meeting a few nights back, and the county chair brought a bunch of mailers to show us. So his neighbor was a Republican. His neighbor's been getting flooded with mailers, and he's like, gave them to the chair because he's like, I thought you'd want to see these. So he's like, Randy Fine's been sending out a ton of mail. And I'm like, Randy Fine has not been sending out a ton of mail. So I go and I take the stack and we start looking at them. And we go for the little paid for disclaimer boxes, right? And it's paid for by this PAC or paid for by this major organization or paid for by this. And only the last one was the only one that said paid for by Randy Fine for Congress. And we're like, okay, he paid for one of these. So we sent one out. So we look at them, and the ones that are sent out are all across the board, but they're mainly focusing on the issue that PAC or organization is, that their chief concern issue is. But there are issues on them. The Randy Fine one was a giant picture of Trump and a little tiny picture of Randy Fine on the side, and it was all just Trump's guy. Trump says Randy Fine is his guy. Trump supports Randy Fine, and just all of these things front and back all over it. And it was a big picture of Trump. And that's his entire message. His message isn't about serving the community. In fact, when asked point blank about it in an interview a few weeks ago, he said no. When asked if he was here to serve the people, he said, no, I am here to serve Donald Trump. And that is another key differentiation in our messages. I am here to serve the people. And in a district that's 46% Republican, there may be a lot of times where what is best for the people and what the people here want or need is more in alignment with President Trump's agenda than with the Democratic Party's agenda. And in order to best serve this district and these people, then that's something that's going to be taken. But cutting 28% out of Social Security is not in the best interest of the constituent in this district. Defunding the Department of Education and having all Title I and special needs and special education funding and civil rights funding all pulled from every public school in the state and given to our governor to disperse as he sees fit. So disconnected from the schools that are presently receiving them to be redispersed across the state to any school, public, private, or charter, is not in the best interest of the residents of District 6.
Well, and as a teacher here in Florida, you've been experiencing that for the last 2 years. Because I tell people constantly, if you really want to, and this was before the general, if you really want to get an idea or get a feel of the future of our world with Donald Trump as president, just look to Florida. Because DeSantis was very proactive, especially on the education side, and the book banning and the voucher system. And
I was going to say, define proactive on education, but okay.
Well, I meant proactive in changing.
Yes.
His effort of feeling mandated because he did come in a huge landslide and running. I mean, come on, he changed the law so that he could run for president and then come back.
Yep.
So the ability for them to change the laws to beat to meet their goals and objectives.
So
your wheelhouse.
Education in Florida. All right. Florida currently ranks 50th in the nation in teacher salaries. And that is despite three statewide mandatory $1,000 raises for teachers in the last 5 years. Now, as someone who received those $3,000 raises, right, I am not anti-teacher raises. I am pro-teacher pay. And I'll give you just a little context for where we're at salary-wise. 2 summers ago, I was up visiting my dad in Michigan, bringing my kids, as I do most summers, to see him. And, every time I visit him, he wants the grandkids around. He's like, you could get a job teaching up here. You could live here. The kids would be closer. I'd be here to help you. And I have never really considered looking into him. Like, I know, Dad, I know. And for whatever reason, I just decided to pull up the local school district he lives in and pull up the salary schedule. So teacher pay is public record and available you can pull up any school district in the country, search instructional salary schedule, and you can find out exactly what those teachers make. I pulled up the instructional salary schedule for that district in Michigan and slotted myself in. They had yearly steps, which Florida used to have, but hasn't had since like my first or second year teaching. So, you slot yourself in. You go down years of experience, and then you go over to education level and certifications, and, you find your salary. It was $25,800 more than where I slot in here in Florida. With the exact same... In Orlando. Working in Osceola, which is a slightly less funded, but still a large district. It's a medium large district. It's not Miami-Dade. It's not Orange. But it's a medium large district in Osceola for sure. 26,000 is, it's $1,000 a paycheck. That's
real money. That's
a lot of money. Right. To be a difference, that it's roughly, 150% of what I'm making here. It's not that we're at the bottom, but we're close. Everyone's clustered together. I didn't even realize how far away the other states had gotten from us over the time until I went and looked it up. And, the reason why DeSantis started these salary increases was because our northern districts, particularly around like Leon and Duval County, Leon County in most was the strongest, was struggling to get teachers. So Florida State University has a huge education program, and, you're right up there. You're 15, 20 minutes away from the Georgia border. Man, if you can start at $9,000, $11,000 more by driving 15 minutes up and crossing the Georgia border than you can working in the county that you just got, why would you? So they have all this huge education program graduating future teachers, and they're paying so much less that they couldn't fill or get any of them into their local teaching positions. And since that's where, the governor's mansion and the Capitol building is located, DeSantis was well aware of this. The issue with these raises is that in addition to having 50th in the country, we're also at the very bottom of per student funding. So we pay less per student to the schools when we fund them, when we create their budgets, than any other state in the country as well. And this is an important tie because a lot of people would think, he pushed for these teacher raises. And so everyone assumes that, the state paid for these. There was no increase in per student funding at the time or during any of these raises, right? So I work at a school of 70 that has a staff of 75 teachers. If you raise every teacher's salary by $1,000 and you do not raise the amount of funding we receive per student attending the school, we now have to make $75,000 worth of cuts, because our teaching staff just went up by $75,000 and our budget did not expand proportionally. So we lose paras. We lose 2 paras and a dean. If you're a large high school with typically has 200 teachers, you went up $200,000. you're losing multiple people in school security positions, and you're losing guidance counselors and deans and paras to make up for that $200,000 because paras get paid. You lose a lot of paras on that. You think teachers get paid poorly? You look up the instructional support salary schedule. It is horrifying. So, our schools struggle where I describe them as we're saran wrap thin as it is. We don't have enough positions now. And I'm at a Title I school, which means we get a lot more funding from the federal government to support. And that federal funding makes up a larger percentage of our budget than it does in any other state because the state funding makes up a lower percentage of the budget than it does in any other state. So we rely on the federal supplemental funding, which at a Title I school gives you more positions for additional math teachers and instructional support for the math teachers and paraprofessionals and special needs teachers. And, we're getting all of these additional positions that are explicitly paid for with those funds. Like the bucket that those funds comes into can only pay for these salaries to add additional staff on outside of what we're budgeted by the state. And when that gets frozen, we lose all those people. When that gets eliminated, we lose all those people.
So what would happen if there was no longer public funded schools through the Department of Education and the Department of Florida Education? And is there enough private schools available to provide education
there's not the supply right now. The first thing that we're going to see if the Department of Education gets dissolved this year, as is part of their agenda, as part of the Project 2025 agenda, and there's a bill that's already in Congress to do so, then what we're going to see across the state is going to be similar to what Volusia County saw around 12 years ago. So remember, Florida has a nice, nifty little rule where school districts are allowed to invest their money. And so if you invest wisely, you can make a profit or a return on that money and have more funds for your district. Something Orange County did in the early 2010s and is how they were able to be one of the first, if not the first, one-to-one digital districts where every student had a laptop or a tablet because between the size of the district and bulk purchasing rates and the money that they had earned beyond their budget from investing wisely, they had extra money to play with. Volusia County, on the other hand, during this time, invested poorly and lost money. And if you remember, around 2013-ish, they had to close a number of high schools and middle schools and consolidate them because they couldn't afford the overhead to keep all the schools open anymore.
Didn't this just happen in Jacksonville in the last cycle? Because not enough students stayed in the public sector, so they had to lay off teachers and close schools for funding because of the funding based on attendance of teachers.
Our schools barely operate with the federal supplemental funding. They cannot operate without it.
Right.
It will absolutely devastate and cripple our public schools. And if you have a child who is special needs, or if you are in a low socioeconomic situation where your child receives free or reduced lunch or other services, you are clearly going to be gravely impacted. If you don't have a child that receives those, you are still going to be gravely impacted. It is going to affect absolutely everyone. I mean, the state is going to have to change their fish codes. They're going to have to rewrite the fish codes, which are the state laws for classroom sizes and the number of students that can be in each class. So our class sizes are going to have to change because if you have a reduction, if we're losing 35% of our budget at some of these schools that the federal supplemental funding makes up, you cannot continue to have as many classrooms and teachers and serve students in the same ratios and manners that you are with that extra 35% of the budget. There will have to be You could see 40 kids in a math classroom. You're going to
Oh,
see.
you don't think that the school boards won't increase their budget to offset it to survive?
They
Which
can't.
that won't flow down to our property taxes for our school
They would
needs.
so they will take
So
a
we're
little
gonna be
while to
touched
that
in a
adjust.
lot of different ways.
It'll take a little while to that adjust. It would have to be a massive increase to property taxes, although only possible
3% would get violated quickly.
You got to remember, last week, Ron DeSantis just introduced the idea of eliminating property taxes in Florida altogether. Now, if you at a state level introduce property taxes, eliminate property taxes altogether, that supersedes the ability of local municipalities and counties to introduce property taxes and generate their own revenue that way on their own. Now, one fun little fact about Florida, in terms of equity of education here, is that, it's very unlike, so I went to college at Stony Brook University in Long Island, New York, and every little municipality in Long Island, New York is its own school district. It's its own feeder system. It's one high school with maybe 2 middle schools and 4 or 5 elementary schools, and they all feed up into that. So every district has a single high school, and they're all based around an individual municipality that has their own varying property taxes. And so, you can see, there was an intersection near the Smith Haven Mall that has St. James on one side and Esconset on another, and Lake Grove on one, and a fourth one I don't remember, maybe Smithtown on the fourth. And all 4 of them, being their own municipalities, are 4 different school districts that all end at that intersection, and 4 wildly different property tax rates depending on which corner of that intersection you live on, because the property taxes are directly linked to funding those school districts, and the districts are, funded more or less based on where you live. In Florida, despite the fact that we have the lowest per student funding, all right, so the per student funding is the minimum amount that every school must have or receive per student. We do not have a single county out of 67 that generates enough money from their tax revenues to meet that minimum, despite the fact that it's the lowest in the country. Which means the state supplements and brings every single district up to that. So every district actually operates at the exact same per student funding because of that property tax level. So where property taxes are now during the country doesn't even get us there, doesn't get us to the bare minimum. So it's a completely equitable board. Your district, if you live in Flagler County, or if you live in Collier County, the wealthiest district, has the exact same per student funding. The additional wealth of Collier County is not enough to break that level or have increased funding for them.
So to bring this all the way around, your voice in Washington on the House brings a proactive federal support for things like the Department of Education, which benefits these young families, in which we're knocking on doors asking for them to recognize you and how these decisions and these actions are going to touch them. And that's where I think the branding and the messaging needs to be just driven to where people realize, I'm on Social Security. I pay attention to it. I'm a retired vet, so I also get VA disability. I'm in tune with all those things because I'm already being touched at some level due to the staffing freezes with the VA, and I pay attention to that. But when I talk to my neighbors who don't really pay attention, or they watch alternative TV, Fox News and whatever, are totally oblivious that this is even happening. And when I go and share that with them and I go, hey, have you seen what's going on with your VA claim? No, I'm fine. Everything's fine. Until they get touched. And that's the message that I believe I'm trying to communicate in this podcast and knocking on doors. And what I know you're trying to do is say, hey, don't be Nero. Don't sit there in your living room playing your violin while your house burns to the ground, because no one's going to come and put it out, as we experienced recently in tragedy and fires and FEMA and all that.
Yeah. Another program that they're trying to disband that is widely unpopular here in Florida. You know, if you live in Iowa or North Dakota, you might not think like, well, why do we need to keep spending all this money on FEMA? If you live in Florida, you know exactly why we need to keep spending all this money on FEMA, because not a year goes by where we don't have, if not a need for FEMA for recovery efforts post-hurricane, absolutely a need for FEMA. Every single shelter that is opened to ensure that people have a safe space to ride out the storm, because a lot of our communities, if they're older housing communities, if they're mobile homes, if they're modular homes, our homeless community, or, you know, there's a lot of people across the state. Or if you live in an apartment that's a 3-story and you're on the 3rd floor, and that apartment was built in the last 10 years since they changed the zoning codes where, you know, only the 1st floor has to be hurricane resistant and meet hurricane codes. You need a safe place to be, and those spaces are all funded by FEMA. My middle school in Orange County is a FEMA shelter, and FEMA requires that they use schools a lot because we have big gyms and cafeterias, and they're these big stone buildings that are safe to ride out the storm with a lot of space for people, you know, and the gyms have locker rooms, so there's showering space for people. They work fantastic as very quick need shelter spaces. We can get one set up we can turn the school, once we get the kids out of there, into a shelter in about 6 to 8 hours. And a few years ago, I was brought on and asked to be, because FEMA requires membership of, and the emergency management requires members of the school leadership team to be shelter management certified. They need them there, because it's not just that, okay, we're going to come take over your space and run a shelter here. We're here in a pinch and an emergency, and we don't know where anything is. Right? So they need people who are on school leadership, who have master keys that go around the school, that know where everything's hidden, where they're like, we need duct tape. Where can we go find that? We need this. Where can we go find that? Like, how do we get to, you know, and so where you are the people who know where everything is laid out around the school and have access to all of it. So I've been a shelter manager and rode out the storms in the shelter as the manager there. It's all funded by FEMA. That money comes from FEMA to make sure that our residents and the people who live here have a safe place to go in weather emergencies. And we have weather emergencies, particularly hurricanes, every year, if not multiple times a year. Florida cannot exist without FEMA at this point. And yeah, people in Florida are not happy to hear. It's not a partisan issue for them about cutting or defunding FEMA.
Well, and I think I carry a pocket Constitution with me, and I read it. It takes like 15 minutes because it's really small. And the first 3 words, we the people. And it's clear. I've lived all over this fine country and experienced a lot of things. No one state, I don't care if you're California or where, can withstand or support or survive without the help of all of us. And that is why the House of Representatives, and where you're headed, needs to be that voice for all of us to be equal and to put across the needs and support. It drives me just insane to hear, I mean, how hypocritical would it be for Mike Johnson to say, we need to hold California accountable before they get any money, when Louisiana's been hit at least 5 times over the past 3
Louisiana
years
is a hurricane magnet.
with hurricanes that have, I saw some numbers recently that showed Louisiana takes 5 times from the federal government what they contribute to the federal government.
And it's the same reason. The Gulf of Mexico, or should you choose or
we
prefer
just call it the Gulf here in Florida, I'm hearing.
is an absolute hurricane magnet. If you're experiencing the wildly fluctuating weather here in Florida that we've been having, where it's 40 degrees one week, 80 degrees another, if you saw it snow in Pensacola a few weeks back, these are due to a weakening of the polar vortex. There is a weaker polar vortex around the Arctic Circle that causes cold temperatures to come further down. So what happens in the Gulf of Mexico, and the reason why hurricanes have a tendency in the past to drive there, is because it's an area that receives, just based on the Coriolis and the current flows of air globally, it receives cold air coming down from the Rocky Mountains and one current flow, and it receives warm water and warm air coming up from the equatorial Atlantic Ocean on the other. And they meet, and when they meet, one rises and one falls, and they start doing a little dance, and that dance swirls, and that swirl becomes a hurricane. So with the increase of cold temperatures dropping lower and going further south as a result of the polar vortex and the weakening Arctic ice flow, and an increase in water temperatures in the Arctic areas, it's basically become a magnet. The two forces are so strong that they're drawing in, and it's why, God, poor Crystal River. I've come, and it's horrible, but I have friends who live in Crystal River, and when we talk to them about it, I call it, Atlantis, because it's only a matter of time before Crystal River is just completely underwater. Our western coasts in the state have been getting hit far more often than our eastern coasts over the last number of years, which is something that if you grew up or lived in Volusia County, Flagler County, right, you remember they used to come from the Atlantic and dead-eye hit, where are they hitting on the eastern coast? And now they all come up into the Gulf. They all come up into the Gulf, and then they've got two places to go once they start heading up. They're going up to New Orleans, or they're coming over and hitting inland on our Gulf Coast.
Yeah.
And it's not going in the opposite direction. It's not changing. It's only getting stronger, and it's only going to be more frequent and more intense as it happens. I mean, back with Milton last year, we had storms that, the numbers that we were seeing, it went from being a class 1 hurricane to a 4 overnight. And it wasn't because it grew so quickly. It was because the models that they use to predict based on what they see in satellite images, right, are no longer relevant. The strength of the spin based on the high contrast in air temperatures is so much stronger than what was expected that they were looking at the size and scale and timeline of it and saying, okay, well, historically, when we see something that looks like this and is at this size and has been around this many days, wind speeds will be around this many miles per hour, and it's a level 1. And then they sent some drones into it and went, holy, the wind speeds are...
The barometric pressure
wind speeds are 50 miles
yeah.
an hour higher than we thought they were, and the barometric pressure is way lower than we thought it was, and this is actually a 4, and it might only be a day away from us now.
Yeah, the warning is... and people have grown so numb to the warnings. And Josh, I can just feel the passion as a teacher. I don't know. I'm happy you're running for office, and you're amazed you're going to be a great representative.
There's a lot of congressional candidates who drop Coriolis effect in their messaging.
Exactly. You're a gift of explaining and sharing all this stuff. You have that teacher's passion. You've always been there for that. And in closing, is there anything you really want to say to the viewers and people that are listening out there about Josh and your goals and what you're hoping to bring to improve our lives?
Yeah. So I think fundamentally it comes back to what is the role of government, and as far as I am concerned, the role of government is not to wage war and ensure corporate profits. The role of the government is to ensure the safety and freedom and protection of the people who live within its borders, all of them. No matter who you are or where you're from, if you are here, we're here for you. And so, that's a major fundamental difference. And what is at stake now is not the ability to wage war or generate corporate profits. What's at stake now is the infrastructure and ability for our government to provide for and protect the people who live within its borders, which are us. The other party likes to use the term America First, but I don't understand how cutting safety nets and support systems and infrastructure that Americans rely on is putting Americans first. And because of where we are at with our media, with our messaging, the deep bipartisan politicization of all of these issues, I feel that it is more important than ever that we have representatives who can use their platform and their access to help message and explain to people what is actually going to happen. My number one impetus in this race was not just to protect public schools, but the belief that we needed someone who understood the threat to public schools and could message it and explain it to people to understand that this is not a partisan issue, that this is something that affects all of us. It affects your children or your grandchildren. It affects your entire community and the future of our communities in mass. And as an elected representative in Congress, I think that messaging needs to be extended nationwide and beyond just this community, so people understand what is at stake if certain actions are taken or supported by their representatives. Hearing broad claims about accountability in schools, or why can't the states just fund them, or look, this is the same thing when we talked about FEMA. The states are not as resilient or flexible in their funding because the states don't print money, right? The reason why the United States of government can continue to go into debt is because in case of emergency, the United States of America can just spend more money. We borrow it from future us. 80% of our debt is to future us. It's money that we didn't have to spend, and so we say, all right, we're going to print it and spend it, and we owe it to ourselves in 2032. And it's future debt to us. Florida doesn't get a chance to do that. If Florida gets hit by 2 Category 4 hurricanes and there is no FEMA, Florida doesn't have the budget or the funding to be able to be resilient and respond, to protect people during the storms or help them recover and rebuild after the storms. We don't have the resiliency that the federal government does in these situations. And so these are federal issues that impact us locally. And even if we have local authorities that can provide statewide or municipal regulations on income taxes or homeowners insurance or housing laws or fair housing, we have federal infrastructures that can protect everyone. We can raise the floor. If you've looked at public schools or, considered or scoffed at schools in states like West Virginia or Mississippi before, which, by the way, as of 2024 are now better funded than those in Florida, why should we want that for them? Right? Why would we want for our fellow Americans less than what we would want for ourselves? A federal Department of Education helps raise the floor for every American. If the worst school in the country is better, then all schools in the country are better. It benefits you and it benefits us as a community and a nation as a whole. And these are the types of issues that I want to fight for and message and help, ensure that we can continue to maintain for both America and the residents of District 6.
Well, thanks, Josh. I love having you here. I love talking with you. It's only confirmed for me that I'm behind the right guy. And I look forward to having you back as our next representative. And you've got a powerhouse of people behind you that feel and want the same thing. So thanks again. You're doing a great job, and we look forward to supporting you with that.
Thank you.
So guys, I want to thank you all for spending some time with us today, enjoying a conversation with Josh Weil, and get out and motivate your neighbors. Hear what we're saying today. This is happening. This is real. You're going to get touched.
April 1st.
April 1st.
Everyone to vote.
That's
April
right.
1st.
Thanks a lot.